There are some journeys that do not require us to move quickly. Journeys that unfold slowly, like a candle flickering in a long corridor, or the soft echo of footsteps inside a vast hall where the ceiling arches higher than the eye can measure. To enter the story of Europe's cathedrals is to step into such a journey. It is not about rushing through facts, nor about listing dates in quick succession, but instead about lingering in the atmosphere, the sound, the smell of stone that has stood for centuries. It is about letting time stretch until the voices of history, mystery, and silence blend into one. Imagine, for a moment, the first sensation of walking into a cathedral. Outside, the world is busy. Horses, carriages, now cars and bicycles, people talking, commerce continuing. But inside, as a great wooden door swings shut, all of that disappears. The air feels different, cooler, older, with a faint trace of wax and incense. The ceiling disappears into shadow. Stained glass windows scatter colors across the floor, fragments of blue and red and gold that shimmer like water. The echo of your own movement reminds you that you are small compared to what surrounds you. Already, you are in another realm. Cathedrals were never built to be quick. They were not projects of months or even decades, but of lifetimes, of centuries. Generations began them, generations continued them, and generations still after came to complete them, or to leave them unfinished, standing as reminders of human ambition and human mystery. Every stone, every carving, every pane of glass carries within it not only craftsmanship, but intention, and sometimes intention that is not fully understood even now. Why was this particular figure carved into a wall? Why was a spiral staircase built leading upward to a door that opens onto nothing? Why do some windows contain symbols that echo ancient traditions older than Christianity itself? These questions remain, and they are part of the quiet magnetism of these buildings. It is easy to see cathedrals only as places of worship, and of course, they were built for prayer, for ritual, for sacred gatherings. Yet, when one lingers in them, another dimension begins to reveal itself. They are also repositories of secrets. They are puzzles carved into stone, layered with the language of the past. A cathedral is never just one story. It is a library of stories, some written, some whispered, some only hinted at in shadows. It is this blending of the sacred and the mysterious, the known and the unknown, that draws us in and keeps us listening. As you walk further inside, perhaps into a side chapel, the flicker of a single candle catches your eye. That candle might be new, lit only moments ago, or it might stand in a place where thousands of candles have burned, one after the other, for hundreds of years. The prayers attached to those flames are invisible, but the weight of them hangs in the air. It is here, in the hushed corners, that one begins to feel how cathedrals are layered not just with stone and glass, but with the emotions, hopes, fears, and mysteries of countless people across centuries. The contrast is always present. On the one hand, the cathedral is precise, engineered with mathematics and geometry that remain impressive even today. On the other hand, it is filled with riddles that escape precise explanation. The architecture is rational, but the atmosphere is dreamlike. The structure is physical, but the experience is almost otherworldly. That tension, between clarity and obscurity, between fact and mystery, is what has made cathedrals so enduring as subjects of fascination. Consider, too, the way they dominate their surroundings. In medieval times, no other building rose so high. They were not just houses of God, but also beacons of stone, meant to be seen from miles away. They were symbols of faith, of power, of ambition. Yet, when seen closely, they are decorated not only with sacred images, but also with strange faces, grotesque creatures, and mysterious signs. Why should a holy building carry such dark imagery? Was it simply decoration, or was there something more, something older, stranger, folded into the Christian narrative? The answers are not always clear, and so the questions linger like incense smoke. Walking through a cathedral at night, when the tourists are gone and only the dim light of a few lamps remains, is an experience unlike any other. The silence seems alive. A sound at one end of the nave carries all the way to the other, a long delay before it fades. Shadows take on shapes, and carvings seem to move slightly when the light shifts. In those hours, one feels a cathedral not only as a structure but as a presence. It is as though the stones themselves have absorbed centuries of voices and are now holding them, quietly waiting for someone to listen. This is the invitation of our journey together, to walk slowly, to listen carefully, to notice what lies in between. Over the course of this exploration, we will travel to some of Europe's most famous cathedrals: Notre Dame in Paris, Chartres, Cologne, Seville, Milan, Westminster, and many more. We will step into their shadows and their light, uncovering stories that are not always told in history books. Stories of relics and rituals, of hidden chambers and forgotten fires, of artists, architects, and alchemists who left their mark in stone. Some of what we find will be historical fact, and some will be legend, but both are part of the cathedral's truth. And so we begin, here, in the quiet acknowledgement that cathedrals are more than monuments. They are mysteries disguised as architecture. They are living puzzles, meant to awe and to unsettle, to soothe and to stir curiosity at the same time. As we walk through them slowly, with patience and attention, they will reveal their stories, not all at once, but little by little, as though they know that secrets, like dreams, can only be given gently. This first step into their world is a step into both history and imagination, into both stone and shadow. It is a step into the threshold of mystery itself. And from here, we move onward, toward Chartres, where the story of light, labyrinths, and hidden meaning begins. When the name of Chartres is spoken, it is often accompanied by a pause, as though the word itself demands reverence. Nestled in the French countryside, this cathedral is not the largest in Europe, nor the most visited, but for many it is the most mysterious. It rises above the town like a guardian of both faith and enigma, its spires pointing not only toward heaven, but toward questions that seem to have no end. Chartres Cathedral is a place where precision and poetry meet, where science and spirit intertwine, and where the silence of its stones seems to whisper secrets only to those willing to linger long enough to hear them. The first impression of Chartres is its stained glass. Sunlight, transformed into a kaleidoscope of color, pours into the cathedral through windows that have somehow survived centuries of war, revolution, and time. Unlike many other medieval cathedrals, whose glass has been shattered and replaced, Chartres holds onto most of its original windows. Standing in its nave, one feels as though they are bathed not in ordinary light, but in something older, something coded. The colors are deep, almost unearthly, blue so intense they seem to pulse, red that glow with warmth and warning. Each panel tells a story, biblical scenes, saints, parables. But hidden among these holy tales are shapes and symbols that scholars have puzzled over for generations. Some suggest alchemical diagrams, others astrological references. Was this cathedral designed not only as a place of worship, but also as a coded manuscript of the universe itself? And then there's the labyrinth. At first glance, it seems simple enough, a large circular pattern carved into the floor of the nave, stretching nearly 12 meters in diameter. But step closer, and its mystery deepens. Unlike a maze, which tricks and confuses, a labyrinth is only one path, winding inward toward a center. The one in Chartres is no exception, an 11-ring path that can be walked slowly, meditatively, as pilgrims once did centuries ago. To walk it is to feel both movement and stillness, both journey and return. But why is it there? This is a question that haunts Chartres. Some say the labyrinth represented the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, allowing those who could not travel to the Holy Land to symbolically walk the path. Others suggest it was used in ritual dances, a way of weaving the body into harmony with the cosmos. Still others believe it was never meant for physical walking at all, but was instead a symbol, a cosmic diagram etched into stone, a reminder of the soul's journey toward divine mystery. Its exact purpose is not written down, and so it remains suspended between explanation and wonder. Imagine the scene in medieval times, pilgrims entering the cathedral, weary from travel, lighting candles, offering prayers. Perhaps they remove their shoes and set foot upon the labyrinth, tracing the path with careful steps. Some may have walked it on their knees, praying with each turn. Others may have seen in it not a Christian symbol, but an echo of something older, the spiral, the circle, ancient motif of eternity found in Celtic and pagan traditions. Chartres was built on a site that had been sacred long before Christianity, and whispers persist that the labyrinth is a bridge between the old and the new, a pagan design preserved within a Christian temple. Beyond the labyrinth and the glass lies another enigma, the relic. Chartres Cathedral has long claimed to house the Sancta Comisia, the veil of the Virgin Mary. According to legend, it was given to the cathedral by Charles the Bold, grandson of Charlemagne, in the 9th century. This relic, it was said, protected the cathedral from destruction more than once. During the fire of 1194, which nearly consumed the building, townsfolk carried the veil in procession, and when the flames subsided, the relic was unharmed. To believers, this was no coincidence. To skeptics, it was legend carefully preserved to strengthen the cathedral's significance. Even today, the veil rests in a reliquary, guarded by silence, its authenticity impossible to prove, yet impossible to dismiss. The architecture itself contributes to the cathedral's aura of mystery. The dimensions of Chartres are said to reflect sacred geometry, proportions aligned with celestial patterns. Its west facade is adorned with a royal portal, a series of sculptures so intricate that one can spend hours examining them without exhausting their detail. Figures of kings and queens, prophets and apostles, all carved with elongated bodies that seem to exist between the human and the divine. Some have suggested these carvings containing coded lessons, mathematical truths, or even messages from lost schools of knowledge. Was the cathedral a church alone, or was it also a stone textbook of sacred science? The builders of Chartres, whose names are largely unknown, must have believed in what they were creating with conviction so strong that their work has outlived them by centuries. And yet, the question of how they achieved such marvels continues to puzzle modern architects. The soaring vaults, the balance of light and weight, the ability of the structure to endure through so much, all of it suggests a knowledge that was precise, even ahead of its time. Did they know something we do not? Or is the mystery simply the depth of their devotion, which allowed them to attempt what seemed impossible and succeed? One cannot discuss Chartres without mentioning the crypt below. Vast and shadowy, it stretches beneath the cathedral like an underground mirror. Here, ancient relics were stored, rituals conducted, secrets perhaps kept hidden from the light above. Some say the crypt was once part of a druidic sanctuary, predating Christianity. Others believe it served as a place of initiation, where only the initiated could descend into darkness before rising into the light of the nave. Walking through it even now, with dim lamps and hushed air, one feels that sense of thresholds crossed, between light and dark, between the known and the unknown. To sit inside Chartres is to feel that you are in a place both alive and timeless. The stones hum with quiet resonance, as though each one has absorbed centuries of prayer, song, and silence. The labyrinth waits patiently, ready to be walked again. The glass glows with a light that is both earthly and otherworldly. The veil rests in its reliquary, untouched by certainty but surrounded by faith. Chartres is not only a cathedral. It is a question carved in stone, a riddle of light and shadow. And perhaps that is its true purpose, not to give answers, but to awaken questions, to remind us that mystery is not meant to be solved completely, but experienced. The labyrinth does not end with revelation. It ends with stillness at its center. The stained glass does not explain itself. It floods the room with colors that stir the imagination. The relic does not prove its story. It invites belief or doubt, each equally part of the human encounter with the sacred. As we leave Chartres behind, we carry with us that sense of having walked through more than architecture. We have touched something laid, something that blurs the line between history and myth, faith and curiosity. And from here, our journey continues toward Paris, where another cathedral, Notre Dame, waits with its gargoyles, its fire, and its own long shadow of unanswered questions. If Chartres is a cathedral of light and labyrinth, then Notre Dame de Paris is a cathedral of shadow and memory. Rising from the heart of the Isle de la Cite, it has watched Paris grow from a medieval town into a modern city. Its towers and flying buttresses, its bells and carvings, have stood for over 8 centuries. To step into Notre Dame is to enter a story not only of faith, but of identity, French identity, European identity, and human identity. And yet, within its stones live mysteries that stretch beyond simple history. There are questions that remain unanswered, images that resist interpretation, and recent events that remind us that even stone is fragile, and that fire can undo centuries in a single night. The first impression of Notre Dame is often its facade, 3 great portals carved with saints, demons, kings, and fantastical creatures. Above them, the famous rose window glimmers, a wheel of light balanced perfectly in stone. And yet, what lingers longest in memory are the figures perched high above, the gargoyles and chimeras. These creatures, half animal and half human, gaze down upon the city with expressions that are both watchful and mocking. Some spit water through their mouths as rain gutters, others sit silently, wings folded, faces twisted in strange emotion. For centuries, visitors have asked, why are they there? Why does a Christian cathedral carry the faces of monsters? The practical answer is simple. Gargoyles are water spouts, designed to direct rain away from walls. But this does not explain the strangeness of their shapes, the grotesque beauty of their forms. Many of them were not built in the Middle Ages at all, but added in the 19th century during a major restoration led by architect Eugene Viollet-le-Duc. Yet even his choices raise questions. Why did he, in an era obsessed with medieval romanticism, decide to populate the towers with demons, birds, and otherworldly beings? Were they decoration, or were they meant to remind us that even in holy places, darkness is never far away? It is not only the gargoyles that hold mystery. Notre Dame has long been associated with alchemists and hidden codes. Legends tell of stonemasons who carve secret symbols into its walls, marks that are said to contain instructions for turning lead into gold. Others whisper of inscriptions linked to astrology, geometry, and even ancient pagan rites. Though historians debate the truth of these claims, the atmosphere of Notre Dame makes them believable. To stand within its walls is to feel that something more than ordinary devotion shaped it. Something led, something encoded. And then there are the bells. Victor Hugo, in his famous novel The Hunchback of Notre Dame, gave a world the image of Quasimodo, the lonely bell ringer who found solace in their sound. But beyond the fiction lies the real history of bells that have rung for wars, coronations, funerals, and revolutions. Their tones once marked the rhythm of Paris itself. During the French Revolution, many were melted down for cannon, but new ones were later forged to restore the sound of Notre Dame. Each bell has a name, and each carries a personality in its tone, as if they were living voices rather than instruments. Some say their vibrations have a power beyond acoustics, capable of stirring not only the air but also the spirit of those who listen. Perhaps the deepest shadow in recent memory is the fire of 2019. The world watched as flames devour the roof, the spire collapsed, and smoke poured into the Parisian sky. For hours, it seemed the cathedral might be lost forever. Yet when the fire was finally extinguished, the great tower still stood, the rose window survived, and much of the stone remained intact. It was a miracle, some said. Others spoke of symbolism. The cathedral, like France itself, wounded but unbroken, scarred yet still standing. The relics housed within, the crown of thorns, believed to have been worn by Christ, was saved by human hands rushing into the blaze. The fire left behind both grief and wonder, a reminder that even monuments of stone are not eternal, and that loss is always close. To walk through Notre Dame today is to encounter layers of time. The medieval stone, darkened by centuries. The 19th century restorations, romantic and strange. The fresh scars of the recent fire, still under repair. In each corner, a new story waits. A chapel devoted to a saint. A statue worn smooth by countless touches of prayerful hands, a candle flickering in a space that has seen thousands before it. Each detail invites reflection, but also curiosity. Why was this saint chosen for this chapel? Who designed this particular image of Mary? Why does one carving of an angel smile while another frowns? Not all of these questions have answers, and perhaps that is the point. Notre Dame's mystery is also in its survival. It has faced fire before, revolutions, neglect, even the threat of destruction during wartime. In 1944, when Paris was liberated during World War II, its bells rang out in celebration, echoing through the streets like a heartbeat returning after silence. And yet, each time danger threatened, the cathedral endured. Some believe this endurance itself is a kind of miracle, a sign that Notre Dame is more than a building. It is a living symbol. There are also quieter mysteries. Stories of ghosts said to haunt the crypts and bell towers. Legends of hidden passages beneath the Seine. Rumors of lost relics and treasures hidden during times of war, never recovered. These tales may never be proven, but they persist, carried in whispers and in the imaginations of those who stand in the cathedral's shadow. They remind us that every great monument carries not only official history, but also folklore, the stories told in hushed voices when the candles are low. Notre Dame is both open and hidden. Millions have walked its aisles, gazed at its rose windows, and climbed its towers. And yet, even for those millions, it remains partly closed. The gargoyles keep their secrets. The symbols on its walls remain half-deciphered. The fire revealed its vulnerability but also deepened its mystery, as though reminding us that we can never fully know or control such a place. It belongs partly to us, but also partly to something beyond us. History, myth, perhaps even the divine. To leave Notre Dame is to feel a lingering weight, not of heaviness, but of presence. The image of those creatures on the tower stays in the mind, watching, guarding, or mocking, we cannot be sure. The echo of bells, whether real or imagined, seems to follow into the streets outside, and the memory of flames licking at the night sky reminds us how fragile even the greatest achievements are. Notre Dame is a story still unfolding, a riddle still unsolved, a voice still speaking in both shadow and firelight. As our journey continues, we leave Paris behind and turn our eyes to Cologne, where another cathedral, equally vast, tells a different story, a story of endless building, centuries of patience, and towers that seem destined never to be finished. Some cathedrals feel eternal because of their age, but Cologne Cathedral feels eternal because of its unfinished story. Rising above the Rhine River in Germany, its twin spires dominate the skyline, jagged fingers of stone reaching into clouds. To see them from a distance is to glimpse determination written in architecture, a vision so bold it seemed at times impossible to complete. For over 600 years, Cologne Cathedral was a work in progress, an endless project, paused, abandoned, resumed, and finally completed only in the 19th century. It is both a triumph and a riddle, a reminder of how human devotion can stretch across centuries without resolution. When construction began in 1248, the builders had a clear goal: to create a cathedral that would surpass all others in Germany, one worthy of housing one of Christianity's most sacred relics, the Shrine of the Three Kings. This gilded reliquary, said to contain the bones of the biblical Magi, had been brought to Cologne in the 12th century and quickly made the city a destination for pilgrims from across Europe. To honor such relics, only the grandest structure would suffice. And so the foundation was laid, and the first stone set, with plans for soaring towers, a vast nave, and stained glass that would flood the interior with divine light. Yet the dream proved too vast for the times. Construction progressed slowly, hindered by cost, politics, and war. Generations worked on it, each adding a fragment, but by the 16th century, work had largely ground to a halt. For centuries, the incomplete cathedral stood as a strange silhouette against the sky, a massive choir and transept rising proudly, but with a great wooden crane perched awkwardly atop the south tower, a silent symbol of unfinished ambition. Locals grew accustomed to it. The crane became part of the city's identity, almost as iconic as the building itself. Some said it was cursed to remain forever incomplete, as though the divine had forbidden human hands from finishing it. Step inside, and the grandeur is immediate. The nave stretches out in a dizzying display of verticality, ribbed vaults climbing higher than seems possible, light pouring through stained glass like liquid color. The atmosphere is at once overwhelming and hushed, a combination of sighs and silence that makes even the most casual visitor instinctively lower their voice. Yet within this space of all lies attention, the knowledge that for centuries it stood half-built, a dream deferred. What drove the people of Cologne to finally return to it after so long? What force compelled them to finish what their ancestors had abandoned? The answer lies partly in the 19th century, when nationalism and romanticism swept across Europe. To the people of Germany, the unfinished cathedral came to symbolize not failure, but potential, a great monument waiting for completion, a reminder of what the nation might become. The decision was made to finish the towers at last, following the original medieval plans that had survived in drawings. And so, in 1880, Cologne Cathedral was finally declared complete. But even in its completion, there lingers a sense of paradox. A building begun in the Middle Ages, frozen for centuries, and then finished in the modern age. Does it truly belong to either? Or does it live in a realm of its own, outside of time, where centuries blur together like shadows on stone? The Shrine of the Three Kings remains at its heart, glowing with gold and jewels. Pilgrims once traveled for weeks, even months, to see it, and even now, its presence is palpable. To stand before it is to feel the weight of centuries of devotion, prayers layered upon prayers, belief layered upon belief. Yet even here, mystery persists. Are these truly the bones of the Magi, or relics of uncertain origin given power through faith alone? The reliquary does not answer. It simply shines, silent and unyielding as it has for centuries. Cologne Cathedral is also a place of contradictions. During World War II, much of Cologne was reduced to rubble, flattened by bombing. Yet the cathedral survived, battered but still standing amid the ruins of the city. Some saw this as providence, divine protection over a sacred place. Others pointed out that its towers, visible for miles, may have served as navigational markers, spared intentionally or unintentionally by bombers. Whatever the reason, its survival added to its aura of endurance, as though the cathedral itself refuses to yield to destruction, no matter how close it comes. Legends swirl around its towers. Some say the devil himself tried to claim the cathedral, frustrated by human ambition that sought to build higher and higher. Others whisper of ghosts of masons still wandering its heights, forever trapped in a work they never finished. Visitors who climb the towers today often describe the strange sensation of vertigo, as if the spires are not quite steady, as if they are always straining against gravity, reaching too far. The very act of completion seems tenuous, as though the cathedral itself prefers the unfinished state in which it lingered for so long. To sit quietly inside Cologne Cathedral is to feel time collapse. You are surrounded by stones laid in the 13th century, glass fitted in the 14th, work paused in the 16th, resumed in the 19th, and restored in the 20th. It is less a single building than a layered history, a palimpsest of human striving. The endless building and rebuilding becomes part of the experience, reminding us that no work of human hands is ever truly complete. Cathedrals, like lives, are always in progress, always shifting between ambition and reality. Perhaps that is the real mystery of Cologne. It is not only about relics, towers, or legends, but about the human capacity to dream across centuries. How does a vision survive when those who began it are long dead? How does devotion pass from one generation to the next without losing strength? The cathedral stands as proof that some dreams are too large to belong to a single lifetime. They must be carried forward, unfinished, until others take up the work. Leaving Cologne behind, one feels both inspired and unsettled. Inspired by the persistence of human ambition, unsettled by the sense that some buildings resist completion because they carry within them questions too vast for answers. And so we turn southward, toward Seville, where another cathedral tells its story, not of endless delay, but of conquest, gold, and the uneasy blending of cultures carved into stone. In the heart of Andalusia, where the air is heavy with orange blossom and the sunlight burns with a golden clarity, stands Seville Cathedral, one of the largest Gothic cathedrals in the world. Its sheer scale seems almost impossible when you first behold it. Rising from the site of a once great mosque, its stones whisper of conquest and faith, of cultures colliding and intertwining, of wealth drawn from oceans and empires. If Cologne Cathedral was a story of unfinished ambition, Seville's is a story of transformation, a place where victory, devotion, and opulence left their marks, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in tension. Construction began in 1401, at a time when Seville was one of the richest cities in Europe. The decision to replace the mosque with a cathedral was no mere architectural choice. It was a statement, carved into stone, of Christian triumph after centuries of Islamic rule in Spain. The builders declared their intention boldly. Let us build a church so beautiful and so great that those who see it finished will think we were mad. And indeed, the result is madness transformed into magnificence. Vast vaulted ceilings soar above, cloisters stretch in endless lines of arches, and chapels spill outward like tributaries of devotion. Yet beneath the grandeur lies a memory of what stood here before. The Giralda Tower, one of Seville's most iconic features, was originally a minaret, rising high above the mosque that once called the faithful to prayer. Today it is crowned with a bronze statue of faith, a Christian symbol planted on an Islamic foundation. Walk around its base, and you can feel the tension between past and present, between conquest and continuity. The stones remember, even if the city prefers to celebrate the triumph. In this way, Seville Cathedral is not only a house of worship, but also a monument to the uneasy blending of cultures, a palimpsest where victory was written over another story never fully erased. Step inside, and the scale overwhelms. Light filters in through high stained glass windows, turning the interior into a kaleidoscope of shifting colors. The nave stretches on endlessly, vast enough to make a person feel as small as a shadow. Sculpted altars rise like mountains of gold and wood, dripping with carvings that tell scenes of saints and martyrs, biblical triumphs, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. The main altarpiece, an immense masterpiece of Gothic woodcarving, dazzles with its sheer intricacy. It is less a single image than a forest of devotion, each figure painstakingly detailed, each panel a story in itself. But Seville Cathedral is also a treasury of empire. For Seville was not only a religious center, but also the beating heart of Spain's connection to the New World. Gold and silver from the Americas flowed into the city, filling its coffers, and much of that wealth found its way into the cathedral. The gleam of the altars and reliquaries owes much to ships that sailed across the Atlantic, carrying treasures gathered through conquest and colonization. To walk through these gilded halls is to walk through history's double edge, beauty funded by suffering, magnificence built upon conquest. The cathedral shines, but the shine carries shadows with it. And then, at its core, lies one of its most famous mysteries, the tomb of Christopher Columbus. Here, within the cathedral's vast interior, stands a monument where pallbearers of stone seem to carry his coffin aloft. Columbus, whose voyages changed the world forever, lies in a place as monumental and contested as his legacy. Yet even his tomb carries uncertainty. Debate persists over whether his remains truly rest here, or whether they lie in Santo Domingo instead. DNA tests have offered some answers, but not enough to silence the mystery. The uncertainty of Columbus's resting place mirrors the uncertainty of his legacy, a man hailed as a visionary by some, condemned as a destroyer by others. In Seville Cathedral, he rests as both a symbol of exploration and its consequences, glory and devastation intertwined. Legends and whispers cling to the cathedral's stones. Some say that at night, when the cathedral is empty, the echoes of the old mosque can still be heard, phantom calls of prayer, faint and fleeting, mingling with the silence. Others tell of treasures hidden within, relics carried from faraway lands and locked away in secret chambers, too sacred or too controversial to display. Visitors sometimes speak of the strange feeling of being watched when wandering the vast aisles alone, as though the weight of centuries of faith lingers in invisible eyes. Such tales may be only stories, but in a building of such scale, where every step carries you deeper into history, it is easy to imagine the unseen brushing close. The Giralda itself is a marvel worth lingering on. Its lower sections, with their Islamic geometric patterns and arabesque beauty, speak of the mosque it once served. Its upper reaches, added by Christian builders, stretch skyward with Gothic determination. Climb it slowly, spiraling upward, and the city unfurls beneath you, Seville's maze of streets, its orange trees, the slow shimmer of the Guadalquivir River. From this height, you feel the cathedral not only as a place of worship, but as a symbol of dominance, a tower that once proclaimed one faith and now proclaims another. It is a tower that has changed its voice, but not its presence. And yet, amid all this power and wealth, Seville Cathedral also carries a strange serenity. When the bells fall silent and the great doors are closed, the vast interior becomes a cavern of stillness. The high ceilings catch every whisper, stretching sound into echoes that seem to last forever. Sitting quietly in a pew, one feels both dwarfed and embraced, as though the cathedral contains not only stone and relics, but the accumulated prayers of millions. Each stone has been touched by devotion, each altar worn by hands and tears, each corner layered with faith so deep it becomes almost tangible. Seville Cathedral is therefore not only a monument of stone, but also a memory, memories of triumph and conquest, of devotion and ambition, of wealth gained and wealth spent. It is a place where cultures collided, where histories overlapped, where faith turned to gold and gold returned to faith. Its beauty dazzles, its scale humbles, but beneath it all, shadows move quietly. The cathedral asks us to marvel, but it also asks us to remember, to see both the light of its altars and the darkness of its origins. As we leave Seville and its cathedral, the golden sunlight of Andalusia fades into something more subdued. Ahead lies Notre Dame of Paris, a cathedral not born of conquest or empire, but one that rose from the heart of a medieval city, a symbol of devotion that became the soul of France. Where Seville tells a story of transformation and triumph, Notre Dame tells one of endurance and identity, its towers watching centuries of joy and sorrow unfold along the Seine. Paris has many landmarks that shine with romance and grandeur, but none carries the same weight of history and mystery as Notre Dame. Rising from the Isle de la Cite, at the very heart of the city, its towers have watched Paris change from a medieval stronghold to a modern capital. To walk along the banks of the Seine and see the cathedral's twin facades is to feel time slow down. This is not merely stone and glass, but the memory of a nation carved into Gothic form. If Seville Cathedral dazzled with conquest and gold, Notre Dame offers something quieter, more enduring, a steady heartbeat, pulsing through centuries, echoing with the voices of kings, revolutionaries, writers, and worshippers alike. Construction began in the 12th century, under the reign of King Louis VII, when Paris was still a modest medieval city. The decision to build such a massive cathedral was both practical and symbolic, a way to assert the growing power of the church, but also a way to anchor the identity of the city around a single, awe-inspiring structure. Over nearly 2 centuries, architects and masons labored, experimenting with pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and flying buttresses, innovations that allowed the walls to rise high and the windows to grow larger. Light poured through stained glass, filling the interior with a mystical glow that seemed to dissolve the boundary between heaven and earth. To enter Notre Dame was to step into another world, where the divine was made tangible through architecture. The cathedral became the stage upon which the story of France itself unfolded. It was here that kings were crowned, such as Henry VI of England in 1431, and here too that emperor sees legitimacy, like Napoleon Bonaparte in 1804, when he crowned himself in defiance of papal authority. It was here that the bells rang out to mark liberation from foreign invaders, revolutions, and tragedies. The walls of Notre Dame absorbed not only prayers but proclamations, serving as both sanctuary and stage. The people of Paris looked to its towers for comfort, guidance, and inspiration, seeing in its stones a reflection of their own endurance. But Notre Dame was also a place of darkness. During the French Revolution, the cathedral was desecrated. Statues of kings were beheaded, treasures looted, and the great building transformed into a temple of reason. Its stones bore witness to the fury of a people tearing down the very symbols of monarchy and faith. For decades, it languished in neglect, its glory diminished, its walls crumbling, its stained glass shattered. Some even considered demolishing it altogether. That it survived is nothing short of miraculous, and much of the credit belongs to literature. In 1831, Victor Hugo published his novel The Hunchback of Notre Dame, a story that elevated the cathedral from building to symbol. Through the tragic figure of Quasimodo, Hugo gave voice to the mute stones, reminding the people of France that their cathedral was not merely a structure, but a soul. The book stirred such passion that a movement began to restore Notre Dame, a restoration led by architect Eugene Viollet-le-Duc. His work, sometimes controversial, breathed new life into the cathedral, reshaping it into the vision we recognize today. It is no exaggeration to say that without Hugo, Notre Dame might not exist as we know it. Inside, the cathedral is a study in contrasts. The soaring vaults lift the gaze heavenward, but the chapels tucked into quiet corners draw it back down to earth. Candles flicker softly in the dim light, illuminating statues worn smooth by centuries of touch. The rose windows bloom with kaleidoscopic light, telling stories in glass of creation, redemption, and eternity. Each window, each carving, each column speaks of devotion and artistry, but also of time itself, the slow layering of centuries upon stone. Sitting in the nave, one feels suspended between the immense and the intimate, between the grand sweep of history and the quiet act of a single prayer. And then there are the bells. Few sounds are as haunting as the toll of Notre Dame's bells, their voices rolling across the city like waves. Each bell has a name and a character. Emmanuel, the great bell, has tolled for coronations and funerals, victories and tragedies. The rhythm of their sound has long been described as a heartbeat of Paris, marking not only the hours but the turning points of history. For centuries, people listened to them not just for time, but for meaning, their chimes signaling joy, mourning, or alarm. When the bells fall silent, Paris itself seems to hold its breath. Mystery, too, lingers in Notre Dame. Some say its gargoyles are more than stone, that they come alive at night to guard the cathedral from evil. Others whisper of hidden messages carved into its walls by alchemists and masons, symbols meant to preserve secret knowledge through the ages. The crypt beneath contains not only the remains of the faithful, but traces of the Roman city that came before. To wander its depths is to walk through layers of history, each older than the last, until the cathedral feels less like a building and more like a living palimpsest of time. In April 2019, the world watched in horror as flames engulfed the cathedral. The spire collapsed, smoke poured into the sky, and for a moment it seemed Notre Dame might be lost forever. Parisians wept in the streets, and people around the world felt as though something sacred was burning. Yet, even as the fire consumed parts of the roof, the towers stood firm. The rose windows survived, the bells were spared, and once again, Notre Dame showed its endurance. The outpouring of support for its restoration revealed how deeply it was woven into global imagination, how it had become not just a soul of Paris, but a symbol for humanity's resilience. Sitting quietly by the Seine, one can see Notre Dame reflected in the water, its towers shimmering in the currents. The reflection wavers, never still, just as the meaning of the cathedral itself shifts with each generation. For some, it is a place of faith. For others, a work of art. For still others, a symbol of survival. But whatever it is, it endures, rising from fire, revolution, and time itself, its heart still beating in the center of Paris. As we leave Notre Dame behind, the journey carries us eastward, toward Prague, where another cathedral waits. But Prague's story is different, not one of steady endurance, but one of shadows, alchemy, and legends whispered through winding streets. St. Vitus Cathedral does not merely reflect a nation's heartbeat. It breathes with mystery, its stones echoing with tales of kings, saints, and magicians. From Paris to Prague, we step from light into twilight, where the line between faith and legend begins to blur. Prague is often called the city of 100 spires, a place where fairy-tale rooftops and Gothic towers rise against the sky in a dreamlike silhouette. At the very heart of this enchanted city stands St. Vitus Cathedral, a masterpiece of Gothic architecture that has long been entwined with the destiny of Bohemia and the Czech lands. Unlike Notre Dame, which pulses with the steady rhythm of a nation's heart, St. Vitus feels different, darker, stranger, a place where faith is inseparable from legend, and where the line between the sacred and the occult has always seemed thin. To enter its vast interior is to step not only into a house of worship, but into a chamber of secrets. The history of St. Vitus Cathedral begins in the 14th century, under the reign of Charles IV, the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia. Charles was not only a ruler but also a visionary, determined to elevate Prague into a spiritual and political capital to rival Rome itself. He commissioned the cathedral not merely as a church, but as a crown jewel of his empire, a place where kings would be crowned and saints enshrined. The foundation stone was laid in 1344, and work began under the French architect Matthias of Arras, later continued by Peter Parler, a man whose genius can still be seen in the intricate net vaults and flowing tracery that make the cathedral so unique. Yet, as with many Gothic cathedrals, the building of St. Vitus was a saga of delays, abandonments, and revivals. Wars, plagues, and shifting dynasties halted construction again and again. For centuries, the cathedral stood incomplete, a torso of ambition overshadowing the city. It was not until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that it was finally completed, its towers and facades brought to their intended form. This long, fractured construction period left behind not just stone, but layers of history, medieval foundations, Renaissance chapels, Baroque additions, and modern completions, all woven into a single, complex whole. Inside, the cathedral dazzles with treasures, but none more powerful than the crown jewels of Bohemia. Hidden deep within a chamber behind 7 locks, these relics include the crown of St. Wenceslas, the patron saint of the Czech people. The keys to this chamber are held by 7 different figures in Czech society, and only when they gather together can the jewels be revealed. This ritual has given rise to centuries of rumors, tales of curses that strike down unworthy rulers who dare to wear the crown, whispers that those who covet the jewels bring ruin upon themselves. History seems to support the legend. Many kings who don the crown met violent or troubled fates, a reminder that St. Vitus holds power not easily tamed. But the cathedral's mysteries are not limited to crowns and relics. Prague itself has long been a city of alchemists, a place where magic and science mingled in shadow. During the reign of Emperor Rudolf II in the 16th century, Prague became a hub of esoteric knowledge, drawing astrologers, mystics, and seekers of the philosopher's stone. Though much of this world unfolded in laboratories and hidden chambers, St. Vitus stood as a silent witness, its towers watching as secrets were sought in fire and mercury. Some say the cathedral itself contains hidden symbols, carvings and designs meant to encode alchemical truths. To believers, the very stones of St. Vitus vibrate with the energy of transformation, holding within them the promise of hidden knowledge. The cathedral is also the resting place of saints and kings. The tomb of St. John of Nepomuk, a martyr drowned in the Vltava River for refusing to betray the secrets of confession, lies in a silver shrine that gleams in the dim light. Pilgrims still touch the tomb, believing it grants blessings or answers to prayers. Nearby lie the remains of Charles IV himself, the emperor whose vision brought the cathedral to life. Walking among these tombs, one feels surrounded not just by history, but by presences that linger. The air seems heavier, charged with the weight of those who once ruled, prayed, or suffered here. Legends cling to the cathedral like mist on the river. One tale tells of a mason who struck a deal with the devil to complete his work. Another speaks of spectral figures who walk the nave at night, guardians of secrets too dangerous to reveal. Tourists have reported strange sensations, cold draughts and still air, whispers without a source, or the feeling of being watched from high above the vaults. Skeptics dismiss such stories as imagination stirred by grandeur, but in Prague, a city of legends, disbelief feels like the greater challenge. Step into the South Tower, and you climb toward the great bell, Zikmund, one of the largest in Europe. It takes multiple ringers to set it in motion, and its toll can be heard across the city, a voice so deep and resonant that it seems to shake the very ground. Legends say that when the bell cracks, disaster follows for the Czech lands, and indeed, it has cracked several times, each coinciding with periods of turmoil. For the people of Prague, the bell is not just metal, but an omen, its voice a warning as well as a call. And then there is the view. From the tower, Prague spread out below like a tapestry, the red roofs, the winding Vltava, the bridges arching gracefully across the water. In the distance, the spires of other churches rise, but none higher than St. Vitus. From here, it is easy to see why this cathedral became the crown of the city, a symbol not only of faith but of identity. It is both fortress and sanctuary, palace and temple, holding within it the contradictions of Prague itself. To sit quietly within St. Vitus is to feel the city's heartbeat, but one tinged with shadows. Unlike Notre Dame, whose bells carried a steady rhythm, St. Vitus feels unpredictable, its atmosphere shifting between grandeur and unease. Perhaps this is because it embodies not just faith, but also power, mystery, and ambition, the human desire not only to worship but to know, to control, to transform. It is a cathedral that speaks not only of heaven, but of the restless human spirit, forever reaching into the unknown. Leaving Prague, one carries with him not just the image of stone towers, but the sensation of standing in a place where history and legend blur. St. Vitus is not easily forgotten. From here, the journey turns northward to England, where Canterbury Cathedral awaits. If St. Vitus is a place of shadows and alchemy, Canterbury is a place of blood and martyrdom, a cathedral that became holy not through crowns or treasures, but through the violent death of a man whose story changed the course of history. England's rolling countryside hides many old churches, but none carries the same shadow of drama as Canterbury Cathedral. Rising in the historic city of Canterbury, its spires and towers stretch skyward in a balance of grace and solemnity. Unlike Seville, gilded with conquest, or Notre Dame, woven into the national heartbeat, Canterbury tells its story in blood. Here, amid the stone and stained glass, the quiet air remembers a murder, a martyrdom that changed the course of English history and made Canterbury one of the most famous pilgrimage sites in the medieval world. The origins of the cathedral reach back to 597, when St. Augustine, sent by Pope Gregory the Great, arrived in Kent to convert the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. He established his seat at Canterbury, and from that time forward, the city became the center of English Christianity. Yet the building we see today is a blend of centuries, rebuilt and expanded through fires, wars, and reforms. The great Norman rebuilding of the 11th century gave it monumental form, and later additions introduced Gothic elegance, soaring vaults, and luminous stained glass. To walk its length is to walk through England's layered past, each arch and chapel marking another age. But it is not architecture alone that made Canterbury legendary. It was the death of Thomas Becket in 1170, an act of violence so shocking that it turned the cathedral into a shrine of pilgrimage for centuries. Becket, once a close friend of King Henry II, had risen to the position of Archbishop of Canterbury. But friendship turned to rivalry when Becket defended the rights of the church against the king's attempts to assert authority over it. Their conflict grew bitter, stretching over years of political maneuvering, exile, and strained reconciliation. On a December evening, 4 knights, interpreting the king's exasperated words as a command, entered the cathedral. They confronted Becket near the altar, demanding that he submit. When he refused, they drew their swords. In that sacred space, where prayer should have risen, steel fell instead. Becket was struck down, his skull split, his blood soaking into the stone floor. The motive shocked Christendom. To kill an archbishop at the very heart of English Christianity was an act so audacious that it seemed almost sacrilegious beyond words. In the aftermath, Becket was quickly canonized as a saint. Miracles were reported at his tomb, healings, visions, and blessings granted to those who sought his intercession. Pilgrims flocked to Canterbury from across Europe, making the journey on foot, by horse, and by boat. The cathedral became a beacon, its fame spreading as far as Rome and beyond. For centuries, the shrine of Thomas Becket was among the most visited holy sites in Christendom. The very stones of the cathedral were polished smooth by the touch of countless hands, as pilgrims sought to connect with a martyr's sanctity. Inside the cathedral, one can still visit the site of the murder. The place is marked, quiet and solemn, its memory preserved. Standing there, one feels an eerie sense of time collapsing, as if the echoes of that December night linger still. The silence seems heavier, as though carrying the weight of centuries of sorrow and devotion. Pilgrims once carried away small vials of water mixed with Becket's blood, treasures that were believed to hold miraculous power. The very blood of the martyr became a relic, binding the cathedral forever to his story. The shrine itself, once lavish and encrusted with gold and jewels, was destroyed during the reign of Henry VIII in the 16th century, when the English Reformation swept away saint shrines and relics. But even without the glittering reliquary, the memory of Becket endures. His presence is woven into the very fabric of Canterbury, a reminder of the eternal tension between power and faith, crown and church. Literature, too, carried the fame of Canterbury beyond England. Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, written in the 14th century, turned the act of pilgrimage into poetry, weaving together the voices of travelers on their way to Becket's shrine. Through these tales, Canterbury became not only a place of devotion, but also a symbol of storytelling, of human voices sharing their hopes, humor, and sorrows on the road. Even today, when visitors walk the pilgrimage routes that lead to the cathedral, they trace not only a religious journey but also a literary one, echoing the steps of Chaucer's pilgrims. Canterbury Cathedral is more than its martyr, however. Its architecture commands awe. The nave rises with Gothic elegance, shafts of stone soaring upward until they dissolve into webs of vaulting. Light filters through stained glass windows that tell stories of prophets, saints, and kings. Some of the glass is among the oldest in England, its colors glowing with a subdued, ancient beauty. To walk through the cathedral is to walk through a treasury of art and devotion, where every corner has been touched by centuries of hands and hearts. Yet the sense of blood remains. Pilgrims often describe the cathedral as carrying a strange blend of peace and unease. In the heart of northern Italy, where bustling streets and fashionable shops hum with modern life, there rises a structure that seems utterly otherworldly. The Duomo di Milano, Milan Cathedral, dominates the central square with a presence that feels both delicate and immense. It is a paradox in stone, a mountain of marble, yet fragile as lace, an edifice of weight and density, yet lightened by countless spires that reach skyward. To stand before it is to feel overwhelmed, as though confronted with a vision drawn not from human hands, but from some dream of angels. The cathedral does not simply belong to Milan. It seems to define it, as though the city itself has grown around this glittering forest of marble. The first stones of the cathedral were laid in 1386, at the behest of John Galeazzo Visconti, the Duke of Milan. His ambition was vast, his vision almost unfathomable. He saw the cathedral not just for worship, but as a testament to Milan's power, wealth, and devotion. What emerged from that vision was not a project for a generation, or even a century. Instead, it was a work that consumed centuries. Builders came and went. Styles shifted, empires rose and fell, but the Duomo continued to grow, rising slowly like a mountain taking shape. It was not officially declared complete until the 20th century, though even now, restorations and additions continue. In this sense, the Duomo is not a building finished, but a building alive, always in dialogue with time. The first impression one has of the Milan Cathedral is its sheer immensity. It is one of the largest churches in the world, capable of holding tens of thousands within its walls. Its exterior bristles with more than 130 spires, each one tipped with a statue, so that the building seems alive with a crowd of stone figures, saints and angels gazing down at the city. In total, the cathedral is adorned with over 3,000 statues, a population of silent watchers carved into marble. When the sun strikes the Duomo at dawn or dusk, its pale stone glows with a golden light, and the statues seem almost astir, as if ready to step down from their perches and mingle among the people. The interior offers another kind of awe. Passing through the immense bronze doors, one enters a forest of columns so vast and high that they resemble the trunks of stone trees. Each column rises toward the vaults, branching into ribs that weave a canopy of Gothic arches overhead. The effect is at once grounding and dizzying, as though one has stepped into a forest not of earth but of eternity. Sunlight filters through the stained glass windows, casting shifting pools of color on the marble floors. The windows themselves are masterpieces, some of them among the largest in the world, telling stories from Scripture in brilliant hues of red, blue, and gold. To gaze upon them is to look through history's most luminous pages, each paint a sermon in light. But beyond beauty, the cathedral is heavy with mystery. Its sheer scale, its almost obsessive ornamentation, has invited endless speculation. Why build something so elaborate, so immense, when simpler churches could serve the same spiritual purpose? Was it purely an act of piety, or did it also serve as a declaration of worldly power? Some whisper that the Duomo was a kind of competition with heaven itself, an attempt to carve into stone a reflection of the celestial city. Others see in its labyrinth of spires and statues a coded message, a symbolic encyclopedia of theology, politics, and philosophy written not in ink but in marble. Legends cling to the Duomo, as they do to all great cathedrals. One tale speaks of the Madonnina, the golden statue of the Virgin Mary that crowns the highest spire. For centuries, it has been said that no building in Milan could rise taller than the Madonnina. To honor this, even modern skyscrapers are being topped with replicas of a figure, ensuring that she remains the city's guardian, always watching from the highest point. At night, when the city lies quiet, her golden form catches the moonlight, a symbol of both faith and superstition. Inside the cathedral lies another enigma, the Holy Nail. Tradition holds that one of the nails used in the crucifixion of Christ is preserved in the Duomo. It rests high above the altar, enclosed in a reliquary, and once a year it is brought down during a solemn ceremony. For believers, this relic connects the cathedral not only to history but to eternity, linking Milan directly to the mystery of the Passion. For skeptics, it is a reminder of how faith and myth often intertwine, each feeding the other in a dance that stretches across centuries. Descending below the cathedral, one finds another layer of mystery. The crypt reveals ancient ruins, the baptistry of St. John, dating back to the 4th century. Here, the city's earliest Christians once gathered, long before the Duomo began its slow ascent. To stand in the crypt is to feel the layering of time, the Roman foundations, the medieval walls, the Gothic heights, the modern city above. All of history seems compressed into this one sacred place, each age built upon the bones of the last. Florence, the cradle of the Renaissance, is a city where art and history seem to breathe through the very stones of its streets. Rising above the terracotta rooftops and narrow lanes is a structure so commanding, so improbably perfect, that it has become the symbol not only of the city but of human ingenuity itself. This is a cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, better known simply as the Florence Cathedral, or the Duomo. Its massive red-tile dome dominates the skyline, visible for miles around, and yet no description, no painting, no photograph can fully prepare one for the sense of what that comes upon seeing it in person. It is not merely a church. It is a monument to a moment in history when faith, science, and art converged to achieve the impossible. The cathedral itself was begun in 1296 under Arnolfo di Cambaio, a Florentine architect of ambition and vision. His plan was bold, a massive Gothic structure that would serve as both house of worship and declaration of Florence's prosperity. The city was wealthy from trade and banking, its merchants and guilds eager to rival the grandeur of other Italian centers. But Arnolfo's death left the cathedral unfinished, and as the years passed, its vast walls and choirs stood incomplete, waiting for a roof that no one knew how to build. For the plan called for a dome so large that it seemed almost impossible to construct. No dome of that size had been attempted since antiquity. For more than a century, the unfinished cathedral loomed over Florence like a riddle. The The space left for the dome gaped open, 150 feet across, defying every known technique of construction. To attempt to span such a width seemed madness. Traditional wooden scaffolding would collapse under its own weight. Yet the Florentines refused to alter plan. Their pride demanded a solution. They were determined to achieve what no one else had dared since the time of the Romans. The answer came in the early 15th century, with Filippo Brunelleschi, a goldsmith by training, who had traveled to Rome and studied the ruins of ancient buildings with obsessive care. He returned to Florence with ideas that seemed both revolutionary and mysterious. In 1418, when the city held a competition to design the dome, Brunelleschi proposed a method so bold that many dismissed him as eccentric, even delusional. He refused to reveal all the details of his plan, fearing rivals would steal his ideas. Yet his confidence was unshakable. He declared that he could build the dome without scaffolding, using techniques no one else had considered. His vision was accepted, and so began one of the greatest engineering feats in history. Brunelleschi's dome was built using a double-shell design, 2 concentric domes, one nested within the other. Between them ran a system of ribs and hidden stairways. To support the weight as it rose, he devised a herringbone pattern of brickwork, which redirected pressure downward instead of outward. He also designed ingenious hoisting machines, powered by oxen, to lift heavy materials high into the air. Many of these machines were inventions entirely new to the world. The work was perilous, the scale unprecedented. Men labored hundreds of feet above the ground, their lives secured only by ropes and planks. Storms and winds swept across the open space, threatening to hurl workers to their deaths. Yet inch by inch, the dome rose. Over 16 years, it took shape, a miracle of mathematics and craftsmanship. By 1436, the dome was complete, crowned with a lantern designed to admit light while anchoring the structure below. It remains the largest masonry dome in the world, a feat never surpassed. To step inside the Florence Cathedral is to feel the magnitude of this achievement. The vast interior, cool and shadowed, leads the eye inexorably upward. The dome's inner surface is covered in frescoes depicting the Last Judgment, painted in the 16th century by Giorgio Vasari and later completed by Federico Zuccari. The scenes are dramatic, filled with angels, demons, saints, and sinners, all spiraling upward toward heaven or downward into hell. On the banks of the River Rhine, where the waters flow slow and steady through one of Germany's oldest cities, there rises a cathedral that seems both triumphant and tragic. Cologne Cathedral, with its twin spires soaring higher than almost any in Europe, is a structure of staggering ambition. It is one of the largest Gothic cathedrals ever conceived, its towers reaching toward the heavens like sharpened quills of stone. And yet, for much of its existence, it stood incomplete, a vast skeleton of arches and walls abandoned to the weather, its dream half realized. More than any other cathedral, Cologne tells a story not only of faith and artistry but of interruption, of centuries where time itself seemed to forget it, before a dramatic return to life. The cathedral's story begins in 1248, when construction commenced with the laying of the foundation stone. Cologne, already a thriving city of commerce and pilgrimage, sought to rival the great churches of France, particularly Amiens and Chartres. At its heart, the project was driven by relics, the Shrine of the Three Kings, said to contain the bones of the Magi who visited the infant Christ. These relics had been brought to Cologne decades earlier, making the city one of the most important pilgrimage destinations in medieval Europe. A shrine so holy demanded a setting worthy of its grandeur, and so plans were drawn for a cathedral vast enough to honor both God and the relics of the kings. The design followed the great French Gothic style, with soaring verticals, pointed arches, and a nave of immense proportions. Construction began with enthusiasm, and for decades progress continued steadily. The choir was completed first and consecrated in 1822. It remains one of the most elegant spaces in the cathedral, filled with stained glass that casts a jeweled light upon the stone. Pilgrims marveled at its beauty, and for a time it seemed the cathedral would soon be completed in full. But history intervened. The later Middle Ages brought economic difficulties, wars, and plagues. By the 16th century, enthusiasm for the Gothic style had waned. Renaissance and Baroque tastes had swept across Europe, and the unfinished Cologne Cathedral was left behind, a relic of another age. Work slowed, then stopped altogether. For centuries, the great nave stood roofless, walls exposed to rain and wind. The twin towers, planned to soar skyward, ended abruptly in wooden cranes, left idle for so long that they became permanent features of the city's skyline. Travelers passing through Cologne marveled not at its grandeur but at its incompleteness, a giant sleeping unfinished by the river. And yet, in its incompletion, the cathedral acquired a strange aura. Locals came to accept it as part of the city's identity, its unfinished towers a symbol of something both haunting and hopeful. The legend even arose that the world would end on the day the cathedral was finally completed, as though its very incompleteness was a charm holding back apocalypse. The half-built giant seemed less like a failure and more like a monument to human longing, paused indefinitely. It was not until the 19th century, more than 600 years after work had begun, that Cologne Cathedral was revived. The Romantic movement, with its fascination for medieval art and architecture, swept through Germany, awakening new admiration for Gothic forms. At the same time, a surge of German nationalism sought to reclaim the cathedral as a symbol of unity and pride. In 1842, King Friedrich Wilhelm IV of Prussia laid a cornerstone for the renewed construction. Using medieval plans that had miraculously survived, builders resumed the work with renewed fervor. For the next several decades, artisans, masons, and engineers labored to complete what had been left undone. At last, in 1880, Cologne Cathedral was declared finished. Its twin spires rose 157 meters into the sky, making it the tallest building in the world at the time. Crowds gathered to celebrate, seeing in the completion not only the triumph of architecture, but also the fulfillment of a dream deferred for centuries. In the vibrant heart of Barcelona, where narrow medieval streets meet wide boulevards of modernist flair, there rises a cathedral that seems to belong to no single age of history. The Basilica de la Sagrada Familia, Antoni Gaudi's masterwork, does not look like the cathedrals of stone we have already visited. It does not resemble the Gothic spires of Cologne, the marble lace of Milan, or the solemn symmetry of Notre Dame. Instead, it rises like a dream made solid, a vision both organic and impossible, as though nature itself had decided to grow a cathedral from the earth. It is perhaps the most unusual and mysterious church in Europe, and fittingly, it remains unfinished, still climbing skyward more than 140 years after its foundation stone was laid. The story of the Sagrada Familia begins in 1882, when architect Francisco de Paula del Villa started the project in traditional Gothic style. His plans were ambitious but conventional, a church with pointed arches, vaulted ceilings, and the familiar vocabulary of European cathedrals. Yet within a year, he resigned, and the young Antoni Gaudi, then only 31, was appointed to continue the work. What Gaudi envisioned would transform the project into something entirely new. He abandoned the conventional plan and reimagined the cathedral as a vast symbolic landscape, one where architecture, mathematics, and nature would blend into a seamless whole. Gaudi devoted the rest of his life to the Sagrada Familia. From the 1880s until his death in 1926, he poured his genius into its design, creating not just plans but intricate models, sketches, and prototypes. His approach was unlike that of any other architect. He drew inspiration not from earlier cathedrals, but from a natural world around him: trees, caves, honeycombs, seashells. He believed that God's true architecture was nature itself, and that the Sagrada Familia should reflect that divine order. Columns inside the church were designed to branch like trees, forming a forest canopy that would carry light down to the floor in dappled hues. Curves, spirals, and organic forms replaced the straight lines of Gothic tradition. From the beginning, the Sagrada Familia was not just a building but a spiritual statement. Gaudi envisioned 3 monumental facades, each representing a different phase of Christ's life: the Nativity, the Passion, and the Glory. The Nativity facade, richly decorated with scenes of birth and joy, was the only one completed during Gaudi's lifetime. Its sculpted surfaces seem almost alive, filled with flowers, animals, and biblical figures. In contrast, the Passion facade, begun later, is stark and angular, its figures carved in harsh lines that evoke suffering and sacrifice. The Glory facade, still under construction, is intended to symbolize heaven itself, a triumphant vision of eternity. Together, they would tell the full story of salvation, not in words but in stone. Gaudi lived simply, dedicating himself almost entirely to the Sagrada Familia. In his later years, he even moved into a workshop within the construction site, living among his drawings and models, consumed by his vision. Locals began to call him God's architect, for he seemed to have abandoned ordinary life to devote himself to this singular work. When he died suddenly in 1926, struck by a tram in the streets of Barcelona, the project was only a quarter finished. His death left the cathedral's future uncertain, for much of his design existed only in fragile models and sketches. Many of these were later damaged or destroyed during the Spanish Civil War, when anarchists set fire to parts of the workshop. The cathedral seemed in danger of being lost, reduced to fragments of an unfinished dream. And yet, the Sagrada Familia endured. Over the decades, architects and craftsmen returned to Gaudi's surviving plans, reconstructing what had been lost, interpreting his vision with the help of modern technology. The cathedral became not just a project of a single man, but a work carried forward by generations, each one adding to the rising towers. In this sense, it belongs not just to Gaudi but to the people of Barcelona, who will continue to build it across wars, economic hardships, and changing times. To step inside today is to enter a world unlike any other. The vast interior is flooded with colored light streaming through stained glass windows, casting the columns and floor in shifting hues of emerald, gold, and crimson. The ceiling soars overhead in intricate vaults, their geometry inspired by natural forms but calculated with mathematical precision. The space feels both sacred and otherworldly, as though one was standing in a forest designed by angels, a place where creation itself has been turned into prayer. The sense of mystery lies not only in its appearance but in its incompletion. The cathedral remains under construction, cranes towering above its spires, scaffolding wrapping parts of its facade. Some see this as a flaw, but others find it fitting, for the Sagrada Familia is a living work, one that continues to grow like the organic forms it imitates. Gaudi himself once said, "My client is not in a hurry," referring to God. In the heart of Prague, where winding cobbled streets climb toward the heights of the castle district, a dark silhouette commands the skyline. Its twin spires pierce the sky above the city, their Gothic forms sharp against the horizon. This is St. Vitus Cathedral, a place where history, empire, and faith are entangled so deeply that to walk within its walls feels like stepping into the living memory of a nation. Unlike the organic dreamscape of Gaudi's Barcelona, the Cathedral of Prague is a monument of solemnity, shadow, and power. It is not a building born of one man's vision, but of centuries of rulers, bishops, and masons, each layer carrying the weight of empires that rose and fell around it. The site itself holds mystery older than Christianity. Before the cathedral, there stood a Romanesque rotunda dedicated to St. Vitus, built in the 10th century by Duke Wenceslaus, the very same figure who will become the good King Wenceslaus of song and legend. Why he chose Vitus, a Christian martyr from Sicily, as patron remains debated. Some historians suggest it was political, a way to align Bohemia with Christian Europe. Others whisper that the cult of St. Vitus held more ancient echoes, connected to pagan rituals of fire and fertility. Even today, fragments of these older layers cling to the cathedral, like shadows that refuse to be fully banished by light. The Gothic cathedral we now see began in 1344, when Emperor Charles IV sought to transform Prague into the spiritual and political heart of his Holy Roman Empire. For Charles, the cathedral was more than a church. It was a statement of power, a jewel that would rival Notre Dame or Cologne. The great French architect Mathias of Arras was brought in to design the new structure, laying the foundations of soaring nave and radiating chapels. After his death, the work passed to the brilliant German architect Peter Paller, who brought his own daring vision. It was Paller who introduced the intricate net vaults, the dynamic lines, and the expressive sculptures that make St. Vitus unique among Gothic cathedrals. Construction, as with so many of Europe's great cathedrals, spanned centuries. Wars, plagues, and political upheavals slowed progress. The Hussite Wars in the 15th century halted work entirely, leaving the cathedral unfinished for hundreds of years. When you stand before its western facade today, you can sense this layered history, Gothic foundations blending into later Baroque and Neo-Gothic additions, a patchwork of styles stitched together by time. It was not until 1929, nearly 600 years after construction began, that St. Vitus was finally consecrated as complete. Yet even in its long delay, one feels a mystery of continuity, the stubborn endurance of stone across generations. Step inside, and you enter a space that feels less like a church and more like a chronicle of Czech history written in glass, stone, and gold. The soaring nave pulls the eye upward, where light pours through magnificent stained glass windows. One of the most striking is a modern masterpiece by Czech artist Alfons Mucha, whose Art Nouveau style brings a vibrant and almost mystical quality to ancient biblical scenes. Each window tells stories not only of faith, but of the land and its people, weaving spiritual and national identity into one luminous tapestry. Yet St. Vitus is not only a place of beauty. It is also a place of tombs, a cathedral of the dead. Beneath its floors and within its chapels lie kings, queens, saints, and emperors. The most famous among them is Saint Wenceslaus himself, patron saint of Bohemia, whose chapel gleams with gold, semi-precious stones, and frescoes of his life and martyrdom. This sacred chamber has long been a place of pilgrimage and legend. It is said that in times of danger, Saint Wenceslaus will rise from his tomb to defend the Czech lands, leading an army of sleeping knights hidden in the mountains. The blending of myth and faith here is seamless, for in this cathedral, history and folklore are woven together as tightly as the ribs of its vaults. The royal crypts hold further mysteries. Charles IV rests here, the emperor who dreamed the cathedral into being, alongside other kings who ruled from Prague Castle. Their presence gives the building a weight that is not merely architectural, but historical, a reminder that this was once the beating heart of an empire. The coronation jewels of the Bohemian kings are kept in the cathedral as well, hidden behind 7 locks, each held by a different guardian. The crown itself, glittering with sapphires, rubies, and pearls, is said to be cursed. Legend warns that any usurper who places it upon his head will die within a year. Whether true or not, the story adds another layer of shadow to the cathedral's aura. There are darker tales still. High in the towers, bells have tolled through centuries of joy and sorrow. One, known as Sigismund, is among the largest in Europe. It is said that when the bell cracks, disaster will follow for the Czech nation. On more than one occasion, damage to the bell has eerily coincided with periods of national turmoil. And then there are the gargoyles, grotesque figures jutting from the walls, their leering faces and twisted forms said to ward off evil spirits. They watch silently over the city, reminders that light and darkness coexist even in places of worship. Walking through the cathedral at dusk, when tourists have left and shadows lengthen beneath the arches, one feels the weight of centuries pressing close. The silence is heavy, yet it seems to hum with memory. This is not just a house of God, but a vault of empire, a shrine of saints, a tomb of kings, and a vessel of myths. It has been both a place of devotion and a stage for power, its stones bearing witness to coronations, uprisings, and prayers whispered in secret. What sets St. Vitus apart is how inseparable it is from the identity of Prague itself. The city and the cathedral reflect one another. Just as Prague has endured occupations, revolutions, and rebirths, so too has the cathedral been scarred, delayed, and renewed. Its very incompletion for so long mirrored the restless, unfinished story of the nation it shelters. And yet, despite all, it stands tall. Its spires still command the skyline. Its bells still ring across the Vltava River. Its stained glass still bathes worshippers in color. In its shadows, one feels the endurance of faith, of memory, and of mystery. For if Sagrada Familia reminds us of the unfinished striving toward heaven, St. Vitus reminds us of the shadows of empire, where power and piety intermingle, and where the dead whisper beneath our feet. From Prague, our journey moves north, into the colder lands where winter lingers long and myths of trolls, giants, and spirits cling to the stones. There, in Norway, rises another cathedral, Trondheim's Nidaros Cathedral, a northern wonder where pilgrimage, legend, and the chill of the north converge. It is here, at the very edge of medieval Christendom, that we will encounter one of the most mysterious sanctuaries of all. Far to the north, where winters stretch long and nights are cloaked in silence, there rises a cathedral unlike any we have yet encountered. It is not in the bustling heart of an empire, nor in the gilded capitals of kings. Instead, it stands in the city of Trondheim, once known as Nidaros, a place at the edge of medieval Christendom. Here, where the cold winds of the fjord sweep across the land and snow lies heavy in the dark season, the Nidaros Cathedral became the spiritual heart of Norway and the end point of one of Europe's great pilgrim roads. Its mystery lies not in dazzling facades or towering spires alone, but in the story of a saint, a king, and the countless souls who journeyed across frozen landscapes to kneel before his shrine. The tale begins with King Olaf II Haraldsson, a warrior king who ruled Norway in the early 11th century. Like many rulers of his time, Olaf sought both political power and spiritual legitimacy. He embraced Christianity, spreading the new faith across his lands, often by force. In 1030, at the Battle of Stiklestad, Olaf was killed, struck down while fighting rebels opposed to his rule. His death seemed at first the end of a reign, but soon after, strange stories began to circulate. His body, buried in Trondheim, was said to remain incorrupt, his hair and nail continuing to grow. Reports of miracles followed. Blind men who could suddenly see, the sick who were healed, the weak who found strength after touching his resting place. The church quickly recognized the power of these stories. Within a year, Olaf was declared a saint, and his burial site in Trondheim became the holiest place in Norway. A wooden church was raised above his grave, and pilgrims began to flock there from across Scandinavia. Over time, the simple shrine grew into something far greater, the Nidaros Cathedral, built in stone in Gothic grandeur, rising over the very spot where the martyred king lay. In this way, the cathedral is not just a house of God, but also a royal tomb, a place where faith and kingship are bound together in a single narrative. Construction of the cathedral began in the 11th century and stretched across the Middle Ages, with additions and expansions shaping its form. English stonemasons, skilled in Gothic design, traveled north to work on it, bringing with them the same techniques used in cathedrals like Durham and Lincoln. The result was remarkable: soaring vaults, pointed arches, and a facade carved with hundreds of statues, all standing against the backdrop of northern skies. Yet unlike the cathedrals of France or Germany, Nidaros carry the atmosphere of the north, the weight of winter, the closeness of myth, the feeling that beyond its walls stretch wildernesses where spirits and sagas still lingered. The west front of the cathedral is especially striking, a vast wall of stone filled with niches of saints, apostles, and kings. Some figures are easily recognized, others eroded by time until their features blur into mystery. Above them rise the towers, often shrouded in mist or snow, their silhouettes stark against the gray skies of Norway. To see the cathedral in winter is to feel both awe and solemnity, as though the building itself has grown out of the frozen ground, a monument rooted in faith yet shaped by the harshness of nature. Inside, the cathedral is both grand and intimate. The nave stretches high, its vaults ribbed like branches reaching upward. Light filters through stained glass windows, casting colors onto cold stone floors. The centerpiece, however, was always the shrine of St. Olaf. For centuries, his silver casket stood in the cathedral, a magnet for pilgrims who came from across Europe to kneel before it. The pilgrim routes to Trondheim became known as a Way of St. Olaf, echoing the Camino de Santiago in Spain. Travelers braved long journeys across mountains, forests, and icy seas, drawn by the hope of healing, forgiveness, or divine favor. The shrine itself became legendary. Contemporary accounts describe it as glittering with silver and gold, adorned with jewels, and surrounded by offerings left by the faithful. The wealth of the cathedral grew, and Trondheim became not just a religious center but a city of significance, linked to a wider Christian world. To kneel at the shrine of Olaf was to stand at the northern edge of the known world, where faith met the frontier wilderness. But the story of the shrine took a darker turn. During the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, Norway came under Danish rule, and Lutheranism replaced Catholic worship. Pilgrimage was outlawed, relics were destroyed, and Olaf's shrine was dismantled. His silver casket was melted down, the treasures dispersed, and his remains hidden. For centuries, the exact location of his relics was uncertain, though many believe they still rest somewhere within the cathedral, beneath its stones, waiting in silence. This lingering uncertainty adds an element of mystery. Is Street Olaf truly gone, or does his presence still lie at the heart of the building? Even without the visible shrine, Nidaros remained a place of deep spiritual resonance. In recent decades, the tradition of pilgrimage has been revived, with travelers once again walking the old routes to Trondheim. Modern pilgrims describe the experience as both physical and spiritual, a journey through landscapes of rugged beauty toward a cathedral that feels like a final sanctuary. To arrive, footsore and weary, and see the towers of Nidaros rising in the distance is to step into a tradition that stretches back nearly 1,000 years. Legends cling to the cathedral as firmly as frost on its stones. Some say that the spirit of St. Olaf still walks its aisles, watching over Norway. Others believe that the cathedral stands on an older, pagan site of power, and that its foundations rest on ground once sacred to the Norse gods. The blending of Christian sainthood and Norse myth has always lingered in the north, where conversion was less a clean break than a gradual intertwining. Even the very name Retold carries echoes of both king and warrior, saint and saga hero. Today, Nidaros Cathedral stands not only as a monument of stone, but as a symbol of Norway's history and faith. It has been damaged by fire more than once, rebuilt and restored with dedication, much like the resilience of the people who built it. Its bells still toll across the city, its choir still sings, and its vaults still echo with the footsteps of pilgrims and visitors. Yet its greatest mystery may remain unsolved, the question of Olaf himself, whose body brought miracles, whose shrine drew thousands, and whose presence lingers in the cathedral like a shadow of eternity. As our long journey through Europe's most mysterious cathedrals draws to its quiet close, we find ourselves not within the echoing stone walls of any single church, but instead in a more reflective space, a place of thought, of memory, of stillness. We have wandered through Paris, Cologne, Milan, Barcelona, Prague, and Trondheim. We have stood beneath spires that pierce the clouds, beneath vaults that mimic forests, beside tombs where kings and saints rest in silence. Each cathedral has told a story, not just of stone and mortar, but of human ambition, fear, faith, and wonder. And now, as night deepens, we pause to ask, what do these great works truly mean, and why do they continue to stir something within us? Cathedrals, in their essence, are paradoxes. They are immense, built to dwarf human scale, yet they exist to serve the most intimate human impulses, prayer, longing, hope. They are solid stone, carved with painstaking labor, yet their purpose is to point towards something invisible and eternal. They are rooted in the earth, yet their spires stretch toward the heavens. This tension between the tangible and the intangible, between the weight of stone and the lightness of spirit, is what gives cathedrals their power. They are not merely buildings, but mirrors of the human soul, capturing in their walls both our fears of mortality and our dreams of transcendence. Throughout history, cathedrals were stages where the human condition played itself out. In Notre Dame, kings were crowned beneath vaulted arches while ordinary citizens lit candles for lost loved ones. In Cologne, generations worked on towers they would never live to see complete, their labor becoming a kind of prayer in itself. In Milan, sculptors carved saints and angels with the same patience that believers carry their burdens. In Barcelona, Gaudi's unfinished Sagrada Familia reminds us that human vision often outlives the human lifespan. In Prague, St. Vitus preserves the weight of empire and the whispers of saints. In Trondheim, Nidaros keeps alive the legend of a king-turned-saint in the footsteps of pilgrims who still arrive centuries later. And what unites them all is not perfection but persistence. Many of these cathedrals remain unfinished, or were once abandoned, or scarred by war and fire. Yet they endure. Their incompletion becomes part of their meaning. They tell us that the search for the divine, the search for beauty, is never truly finished. It is a task passed from one generation to the next, from mason to mason, from pilgrim to pilgrim. In this sense, cathedrals are not frozen monuments but living things, growing, evolving, carrying forward a collective spirit of countless souls. There is also mystery woven into every stone. We have seen how legends cling to these places, bells that toll as omens, crowns that curse their wearers, saints who rise from their tombs, architects who seem to build with visions of future ages. These stories remind us that cathedrals are not only places of reasoned geometry, but also of wonder and imagination. They invite us into a world where the boundary between the real and the mythical blurs, where light filtering through stained glass can feel like a message from another realm. Even for those who do not believe in miracles, the architecture itself feels miraculous, as though humanity has briefly touched the infinite. To walk through a cathedral at twilight, when shadows pool in the chapels and the last rays of sun turn windows into fire, is to feel the depth of time itself. You sense the countless footsteps that have echoed before yours, the whispered prayers, the silent griefs, the hopes offered upward. In that moment, you realize that cathedrals are not just structures but containers of memory, holding within their walls the invisible traces of all who have entered. They are, in a way, human hearts built in stone, fragile in their own endurance, eternal in their reach. And so, as we close this journey, the cathedrals become less about their physical forms and more about what they awaken in us. They remind us of our smallness in the face of eternity, yet also of our greatness in daring to imagine eternity at all. They remind us that faith, whatever form it takes, is not just about belief but about longing, the longing for meaning, for connection, for beauty that outlives us. And perhaps that is why, even in our modern world of glass towers and steel bridges, cathedrals still command awe. They whisper of something beyond utility, something beyond time. When the last bell falls silent and the doors are closed for the night, the cathedrals remain, dark against the sky, patient as ever. They do not hurry. They do not fade. They wait, as they always have, for the next visitor to enter, the next pilgrim to kneel, the next soul to look upward and feel, for a fleeting moment, the presence of the eternal. And in that stillness, in that quiet awe, they fulfill their purpose, not only as houses of God, but as mirrors of the human spirit, reminding us of who we are and of what we continue to seek.